before I start demonstrating how to create a dashboard, I just wanted to share one dashboard that we created for a client. This was specifically for digital analytics. It was created both with Web Trends and also another client. We did a similar one with Site Catalyst data. And if we look at this, the idea behind a dashboard is to make it attractive, but also to gain new insights. And we could, of course, combine many different data elements here, but in this case, this is an online retailer that has sales of $378 million. Tableau, of course, wants to refresh because I clicked on that. And so in this case, we're looking at specifically page views, or we can look at visitors, visits, orders, and revenue. And we can choose how we want the dashboard to be displayed. We're looking here at daily revenue, and we're looking at how people purchased product on our website from Sunday through Saturday. And we can see the darker the color, the less activity there is. And most people, of course, are buying things between 6 a.m., it turns out, and 8 p.m., with the highest level of purchase between, particularly on Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays. But we can switch this view and say, let me look at this per visitor instead. So the dashboard will refresh. And it's interesting to see that there's actually a lot of people coming to the site between 10 and 6. And there's not a huge difference, but when they happen to buy, it's at the end of the day. So that's something that this client learned and was able to modify the interaction of the website to encourage more purchases when, in fact, there were a lot of people on the site. We can also look at a specific week if I chose to by clicking on that, and again, the dashboard will refresh. Or I can lasso certain data points and say, I want to just look at this area here, and the dashboard will again update to reflect that information. So this is how a finished dashboard would look inside a browser to view that dashboard. But let's go ahead and actually create a dashboard from scratch. So in this case, the first thing that we're going to do, now that we're in this product, Tableau Desktop, is I'm going to connect to data. And connecting to data in Tableau is really, really easy. I just need to point at the file I want to access. There's no scripting or programming or anything like that, any nasty things like that. I can connect to various file formats, access Excel and text files, and a number of different database and server-based systems, including Google Analytics, IBM Netezza, SQL databases, Oracle, SAP, and so on. In this case, I'm going to connect to Excel. So I'm just going to click on Excel, and I'm going to choose one of these data sets here in Excel, and I'm just going to double-click on that. And it's going to go out and fetch that information and come up and ask me, what parts of that Excel spreadsheet do you want to bring in? I'm going to click OK, and now it says, do you want to bring in this data as with a live connection, or do you want to bring in all or some of that data? If it's a really, really large data set, maybe hundreds of thousands or millions of rows, you may want to bring in some of it into Tableau's in-memory engine, which is super fast for processing. If you have a good internet connection and the file's not that large, you can happily connect to it live, which is what I've done. And let me actually show you the spreadsheet here. Here's the spreadsheet that we're working with. It's got a bunch of rows and columns. It's sales information for various customers buying a bunch of different products. And it's not a terribly large file. It is 100 rows. So what Tableau did when it brought in that data was it categorized everything as either dimensions or measures. Dimensions are really things that you can categorize and subdivide up, things that you would find in your headers of your columns and rows. And measures are the data sets themselves, the things that are aggregated, so the things you would find in your cells. Now, Tableau does the best job it can. You saw it did it super fast, but it may have made a mistake. You may say, actually, this count is actually not a measure, it's a dimension. That's fine. You can just drag it up here. It puts it up here for you. So there's lots of flexibility on how you want to structure this information inside of Tableau. We also have the ability to do some data modeling right inside the product. For instance, I might say that product subcategory really belongs to category. I'm just going to drag it, drop it on top, then I'm going to rename this, and maybe I'll call it products. And you can see Tableau creates a nesting here for us. Similarly, I might say the container belongs to that, as does product name. Likewise, I might say that city belongs to state. I drag it on top, and I'm just going to call this location. And I might say that zip code also belongs to that hierarchy. So we're creating some hierarchy and some nesting right inside Tableau. It's really important to understand here, though, that we're doing this only with the visualization. We're not touching the underlying data source. This is a read-only file. It's very important that IT retain their responsibility as the guardian of the data, but as a user, you want to be able to create visualizations because you understand your data and you know what questions you need to ask. So let's start then by creating some visualizations of this data. And you can see everything gets organized as columns and rows. So if I'm a fairly sophisticated user, I might say, well, I want to look at sales, and I want to create a row, sales, and it comes up and it says that's 14.9 million in sales. And I want to look at product category in one of my columns. So it creates that for us. The plus sign up here is because it created this nesting. And so I have the ability to click on the plus sign to expand that out. Similarly, I can click on the product subcategory to expand out product container and right down to name. In this case, we're just going to stop at product subcategory. But I've now created a bar chart very simply that describes sales for each of those product categories and subcategories. Now this data also contains various regions. So I might say, well, I want to color everything by the region. And if I choose that's not what I wanted to do, I can go back, and I can go back as many times as I wish. I may instead want to create a new row for each region. And so that has now been done. So we're looking at sales figures, but let's bring profit into this as well. And that's really simple. I can just take profit, I'll just drag it onto the chart and let go. And it now color codes everything by how profitable things are. And of course, I can go in here as well and change the colors that's being displayed into a number of other choices, including orange and blue diverging, which is a good color scheme to use because it's good for color blindness. And I'm going to use a stepping approach of 6 types so that we get a little bit more vividness of where we're losing money and where we're profitable. Again, from a visualization point of view, we might want to combine some of these containers. So I'm using my control button. I'm just going to click on envelopes and some of these smaller items, and I'm going to group all these together. And I have a paperclip over here that allows me to do that. And then I'm just going to go down here and say edit that name and call it small items. And so that's now done. It makes it much easier to understand the data without changing the underlying data itself. So I'm going to save this sheet, just call it prod 1, let's say. And now we're going to create a second worksheet of this same data set. And in this case, I may not be familiar with columns and rows. I may not care about that. I'm just going to go down here and I'm going to double click on sales. And it creates a bar chart for me. I'm going to double click on profit. It now changed that to a scatter plot. And that's a very significant feature within Tableau. I have this drop down over here that's called Show Me. And Show Me always instructs to me what is the best way to visualize this data. Not what looks the prettiest, but what's the best way in order for the human brain to comprehend that data. And you can see it actually puts things in, it has many choices, but it highlights the ones in color that are options for me. And then it highlights the one with a blue border that it says is the best option. But I could also do this as a bar chart, but it says a scatter plot's the best choice, so I'm going to select that. And at this stage, we're only looking at 2 data points, profit and sales, and that's it. But let's bring customer data in here as well, and I can just take the customer name, drag that onto the chart, and now it displays every single customer that's in this file that we were working with. I'm going to pivot that, and I can pivot it again to choose which way I want to lay this data out. And I got the 0 line here, which is fine. And I also might want to organize this by product category, as we did before. So I'm going to drag that onto color, and now it colors all of the elements for us. To see this a little more vividly, I actually like to use solid circles. I'm going to bring down the transparency on that a little bit, and then I'm going to create a border so the numbers start popping out and we can see the ones behind. We also have the ability to take some of these outliers, and if they're causing too much noise, we can just say exclude those to the chart, so we're not going to deal with those right now. And so here now we get a scatter plot of all of these sales versus profit information. Now, to get a better idea of how things are performing, I might want to create a trend line, and I can now suddenly see that office supplies, and I can click on that to highlight it better, is performing the best, and then technology and then furniture is doing the worst for us. And I don't know how many here are familiar with the Gartner Magic Quadrant, but we can sort of create one right here on the fly. I can create a reference line. I can make that a band, various types. I can look at mediums and maximums, but I'm just going to look at the average at this point for the vertical bar. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the horizontal bar. And we now have a magic quadrant where we can see how things are performing. And of course, the ones down here on the bottom left are really our worst customers. They're not very large and they're not very profitable. So I can take those, I can lasso them around, I can take a look at the underlying data to see exactly who those customers are if I want to do anything else with them, or I can export them out to do something else specific to that set of customers. Now, one of the things that a customer asked me the other day was, they were looking at this and they were saying, like, well, what is it that's causing us to lose money in some of these areas? And one of the great things about Tableau is that it's not only a terrific tool for visualization, but it's not just about making things look nicer and better charts. It's to gain new insight. And that's critical in this case. So we might want to look at this and say, what is it that's causing us to lose money down here? Maybe we gave large discounts. So if I look at the discount measure, if I drag that up to the size chart, the larger the discount, the larger the circle. While we gain some information there are certainly lots of areas where the discounts are fairly high, but it doesn't seem to correlate with how we're losing money. So let's go back on that and take a look instead at unit price. So the more expensive the price, the larger the circle. Now, we see a huge correlation that the more expensive items are obviously the ones where we're losing the most money. And to see that more vividly, we can also take product category and simply make that a separate column. And so now we have 3 columns here, and you can very quickly see how we're losing money on the technology. And I'm just going to go back on that. So we'll call this one prod 2. The next one I'm going to create is, the sales are occurring all across, in this case, the United States. And so by double-clicking on state, it puts a dot in every state where there is a sale. I'm going to double-click on sales. That'll now size those dots for the relation to the relative size to the amount of sales. And if I take profit and just drag it on top, it creates a new row for me. But I might say, I don't want a row. I just want that profit to be right on top of the map, which is now what we've done. And so now each circle is sized the way we want, and it's color-coded according to how profitable each area is. This data also contains 4 years of information. So if I take the order date and just drag that onto columns, it tells the system, create 4 different views of this data, 1 for each year. And I'm going to go a step further and create a quick filter on that over here so that I can now select which year it is I want to view. And I can also ask the system to create a single value drop-down if I want, or, for instance, a slider, which is something that I kind of prefer the slider, where I can say, choose which year you want to look at. So we're going to call this one maps. So let's create another view of this data. In this case, it's going to be of customer information and customer sales. So I'm going to double-click on sales. I'm going to double-click on customer name, and that lists all our customers. I'm going to sort those customers, and I might want to bring profit in here to see how profitable they are. But in fact, one of the things we might want to see also is, what's the gross margin for each of these customers? Because that's a very important value that we might want to see. Currently, that doesn't exist in the measures. So I'm going to just create a new one by, say, create a calculated field. And we'll call this gross margin. And I happen to know that the calculation for that, and you can see here we have all the functions that you would expect to see in Excel. The calculation for gross margin is the sum of my profit divided by the sum of our sales. And Tableau is kind enough to come up here and say that calculation is valid. And this would be the only time you see me doing any kind of scripting or anything like that. But this was to create a calculated field that didn't so far exist. Now it exists here as the gross margin. I'm going to drag that up to rows, and now we can sort everything by gross margin. And we can tidy this up a little bit. Right now, gross margin is said to be 0.396, but we might actually want to have a different way of describing that. So I'm going to say make the number format for that instead of percentage, and don't have any decimal points on that. So now when we hover over, we see that gross margin is 39%, which is what you would expect. So let's call this one customer. So we've created now 4 worksheets. And let's now create the finished dashboard for ourselves. And we're going to do that by simply, it says drop sheets here. Well, that's pretty simple. I'm just going to take product 1 and drop it over here. Product 2, and you can see it grays out, showing me where I'm allowed to drop it. And I'll take maps and maybe put that down here. And customers, I'll put that up here. And we can resize all of these as well if we want to, and reorganize that any way I want. But we can see here the slider that I created for the date system still is here. And as I filter through, that map updates. Now, one of the things that would be nice if it also controlled the other views. So I can go and tell the system, apply this to all of the worksheets when you choose to change the map. And now you see everything is updated automatically throughout. Similarly, I might want to select these bad customers over here, and I'm able to do that and gain information about them, but it doesn't update the rest of the table, the dashboard. So again, I'm going to tell the system, use this as a filter, and now when we select those, you see everything else gets updated in the dashboard. And this applies to all of these pieces. I can have all of them control the rest of the dashboard for me. So in this case, if I wanted to use this one as a filter and say, why are we losing money over here? Where are these customers? Everything gets updated to see those customers, and they get listed out here. And one of the final things I'm going to show is that we often get requests to blend data, bring in data from another data set, and also include that in our dashboard. So I'm going to create a new worksheet, but in this case, we're going to start by connecting to data again, like we did before, and we're going to connect to a text file. And this is shipping information that's stored as a CSV file, and I'm just going to click OK. And that's going to allow us, again, to choose whether we import that by connecting live or importing some or all of the data. I'm going to connect live to that data, and you can see here now on the left, this is the new data set that we brought in, and this is the old data set. So let's start by saying, let's look at sales, and I want to look at product category, which we used before. Then I want to look at all of the customer names in detail, and I also want to color code it by customer segment. So we've done that. So here is that information. Now let's introduce the shipping data, and you can see Tableau automatically joined that data. They blended the data, and it shows here with this clip. So the shipping cost information, I'm going to drag up the columns, and now Tableau says the best way to visualize that is in fact as a scatter plot. And so we now see it by furniture, product, office supplies, and technology. And if I want to create that as one scatter plot, I can simply say get rid of the product category and have that display in one area. And I'll call this shipping. If we go back into our dashboard that we created before, you see here are the 4 sheets we already used. Shipping is not being used currently, but I'm going to take shipping and just drag that onto the dashboard. And now here's our shipping information. Admittedly, this is getting a little bit crowded. We can resize some of these if you want. But same thing applies. All of this data is interconnected to allow us to explore it. So if I click on change in the year, everything gets updated, including the shipping information you'll notice over here.